Notre Dame, Alabama would be quite the battle if we were talking historical facts and wins and winning percentage and championships and having that argument, but not a whole lot of people think it's going to be a battle on the football field on New Year's Day in Dallas. We got Nathan Erbach on the line, joins us on a regular basis to talk Notre Dame football. Nathan, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Mark. I'm doing well. I had a good Christmas and looking forward to New Year's, and I hope you're doing the same.
Absolutely. So game's coming up in just a couple days. Notre Dame is a enormous underdog, which I would love to know had they performed better against Clemson in the ACC championship game. There was so much respect given to Notre Dame by many coming off the win against Clemson in South Bend, and then it just seemed to turn in a complete opposite direction based on that performance, and now we see the result being a 20-point spread against Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the performance against Clemson certainly plays a role. Obviously, I think Florida was a 17-point underdog against Alabama in the SEC championship game. I think Notre Dame probably would have been a little bit lower than that going into the game without the loss against Clemson. So I mean that probably shows you right there. Other than that, though, I mean the fact that this is a 20-point spread or 19.5, whatever it is, really shows the parity or the lack of parity in college football these days. Because Notre Dame this whole season leading up to that Clemson game, a lot of people had a lot of respect for them, especially after the first time they played Clemson on November 7th and ended up winning. And now they're I think it's the biggest dog in playoff history, which is crazy to me because I don't think Notre Dame's the worst team to make the Final Four. So yeah, no, it's certainly interesting. I think Alabama and then a healthy Clemson team are above the rest of college football right now, at least this year. I'm hoping to keep the game close more than anything, I guess.
Yeah. A couple other teams come to mind when I think worst playoff team in the 7-year run of the college football playoff. Got Nathan Erbach on the line. Please like, comment, share the videos on social media, subscribe right here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Best discussion, debate, and analysis. That's our mission. That's our goal every day. So there is a class distinction and a argument over class distinction in college football like no other sport. I think for a number of reasons. We won't go into those, but we'll talk about the class distinction. So for a lot of people, it's Alabama, Clemson, then another tier. For some people, it's Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, another tier. Some people base it on talent. Some people base it on recent championships, performance, some combination of the two. Notre Dame has reached a number of big games. They have lost basically all of them in recent memory. They have performed better in some of them recently, i.e. Georgia on the road last year, Georgia at home a few years ago when Georgia came that close to winning a national championship, and of course earlier this year breaking through and winning in overtime, regardless of what the evaluation is of Clemson's roster on the field that day. So your thought process about the talent gap between Alabama and Notre Dame?
I mean, it's certainly there. I mean, just look at recruiting rankings and you'll see that Alabama signs, 4 or 5 stars every year. Notre Dame's lucky to sign one, if any. And then, you bring that into the top 50, top 100. Alabama's, more of a football factory at this point, and Notre Dame's, they pride themselves on, being a good football program, but also preparing kids for, other avenues down the road. And that's not to suggest that other programs don't. And Alabama certainly has, successful, kids that graduate from the football program and go on to do good things that aren't in football. But Notre Dame is kind of known for their academics and different things like that, and it's a little bit harder to get into the school even as an athlete. So I think that plays a role. But no, I mean, other than that, I mean, I really think that there's a couple programs above the rest. Alabama's one of them, and while I think since maybe the 2012 championship game against Alabama, I think Notre Dame has become a better program overall. I also think Alabama's become a better program overall. So I don't even know if I want to say that Notre Dame's closed the gap per se. I just think both programs have consistently gotten better through this 10-year stretch or so. And it's kind of an interesting dynamic on that front.
Yeah, if you just look at sheer talent and you're going to go with recruiting rankings, then you've got a top 4 in some order. I don't even think there's necessarily an order. Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and actually Georgia would be in the argument if you're just talking about sheer recruiting rankings and putting the roster on paper. And then as you transition that to results on the field, then Georgia drops off. Ohio State's an argument as to whether they drop off and are their own tier in a sense. But Notre Dame has certainly upgraded the program under Brian Kelly. And, you know, the first thing, Nathan, people think about when they think talent gap typically is speed. They think about speed and athleticism. Notre Dame has produced tremendous tight end play down through the years. You know that up until the current two that are on the roster right now. But they think of outside speed, and Notre Dame's obviously also produced tremendous wide receiver talent, but they seem to be big body guys that high point the football, that box guys out and play that role, not necessarily speed guys. You were touting a couple speed guys in the offseason as maybe taking the top off the defense, being that next dimension of Notre Dame wide receiver, but it hasn't necessarily worked out because of injuries and so forth.
Right. Yeah. Kevin Austin's missed the entire season for the most part. He was a guy that kind of had the best of both worlds. He was a little bit bigger body, but also could stretch the field. And then Braden Lindsey's been dealing with a hamstring all season. So that's obviously hasn't really helped the narrative in that sense. I think with Notre Dame, team speed is so much better than it was in 2012, but a lot of that has to do with the defensive side of the ball. Jeremiah Wusu-Koroma is just a different type of linebacker than, say, like a Manti Te'o, even though Manti Te'o was an incredible, college football player and throughout his career. Guys like Kyle Hamilton, who is one of the 5 stars that they've signed over the last year. I mean, he's just a different type of athlete than they've had on that side of the ball. But you're right. I mean, I think where Notre Dame really it's a strength of their team, but it's also, I was talking to I think it was actually John on Always Irish the other day about this. And I think the big bodied receivers go up and catch the 50-50 balls, make it essentially a 90-10 ball a lot of the time, works against a lot of the teams that Notre Dame should beat. And as we can see, they've pretty much beaten everybody they should beat over the last, 3 or 4 years. But what it doesn't do is beat the teams that are bringing in better talent than Notre Dame. So having guys on a consistent basis like a Will Fuller, I think will go a long way for Notre Dame if they can start bringing in some wide receivers and some other skill position talent that can really stretch the field. And instead of methodically going down the field, taking off 5, 6 minutes, 8 minutes off the clock, which is really hard to do on a consistent basis, they need guys that can go up and, catch a 60-yard pass and score a touchdown, and have drives like that.
You have to wonder what the ACC championship game did to the team's psyche, knowing what they did at South Bend, hearing all the noise about Trevor Lawrence not being there and 3 defensive starters, and then going out, and had they lost by a touchdown, that would have been one thing, but losing by 24 points and it not being a game into the second half, whether that, regardless of what they're saying, is hurting their psyche going into this game.
I wonder. I've kind of wondered about that too. Part of me thinks, obviously maybe they just are a shell of themselves from the entire season, and they fold up, and they get blown out again. And in reality, the narrative doesn't change. But I guess at that point, it doesn't really matter because what's to lose? You'd rather be in the college football playoff and lose and keep the same narrative because it really doesn't do anything to play somebody else that you would probably beat in a normal bowl game. But then the other part of me thinks this is the first time in one of these big games, at least going into it, because they're fresh off a loss against a really good Clemson team, where they don't really have like the "we belong here" attitude. And so now they need to prove that they belong there. I think going into the Clemson game, they thought that they belonged because they beat them the first time around. They were undefeated. 2012, they were undefeated going into Alabama. Same with 2018 against Clemson and against some of these other opponents that they've played in big bowl games over the last 10 or so years. Now it's a little bit of a different story. They just got hammered, and the team, was embarrassed, I guess, to a certain extent on national television, and now they want to go and prove that they can belong instead of believing that they belong to a certain extent. And I don't know if that's gonna show on the football field. I think a lot of the times, I mean, people want to prove they belong and they get blown out anyway. But at least from a Notre Dame perspective, it is a little bit different than what they've had in the past. So I wonder if they're able to take that and do something a little bit different on Friday.
Please like the videos and share them out on social media. People don't know that we're here talking college football every day. All right. The rhetoric I've heard out of Notre Dame is we're going to play physical football. We're going to rely on the offensive line. We're coming at you. We're going to make no bones about it. Here we are. We're coming at you. Some of that, I don't like to conjecture what's going through people's minds. I don't know if that's, we're trying to talk ourselves into being confident and that we can man you up, or this is what we're doing, or, this is a smoke screen and we've got a really aggressive pass happy game plan. And we're going to talk about, sizing you up and beating you up front. But that's been the talk from Notre Dame about the running game and playing physical.
Right. And I think to a certain extent with how late they are in the season, it's hard to just kind of change your offensive philosophy because I think you probably get blown out more if you do that. If Notre Dame tries to throw 50 times, 60 times against Alabama, and throw it all over the field, then they're probably going to get blown out. But if they try to stick to their strengths, I mean, Notre Dame's offensive line, that is something that could compete against Alabama in regards to even from a recruiting ranking standpoint. They have 4 or 5-star guys all across the line of scrimmage, and that includes their backup at center who's going to play. In the playoff game as well. And then their rushing attack has been a strength of theirs all year. So I think that they do need to try to stick to their strengths because I really think that's the only way they have a chance. But at the same time, they can't go 0 for 2 in deep shots or big play shots because 0 for 2, whether you go 0 for 2, then you only tried it twice. I'd rather see you go 3 for 10 and give that opportunity to, or at least let Alabama or whoever they're playing know that it's in the arsenal or it can be done, and they have to keeping them honest, I guess, to a certain extent. Even if the percentage of doing it isn't great, but you got to show it a few more times than they did in the ACC championship game.
Yeah, when I think about Notre Dame belonging in the playoff, I think they clearly belong from the standpoint of playing a tough schedule and performing well against that schedule. We can get into conference championships and whether that should matter or not, but just in regards to quality record versus a quality schedule, I think they belong if you just take it based on that. A lot of people don't like any kind of comparisons to the NFL, and I think that they're two distinctly different sports and structures, but I think that there are some things that could be taken from the NFL model and given to college football in terms of objectivity. And when it comes to this situation where people say, this team and that team don't belong, certainly I also think that, we've got a small sample size of 6 years and 12 playoff games in the semifinals. And, if we were going to evaluate NFL teams and pluck out the 9-7 playoff teams versus the 13-3 teams, we would have less of an interesting playoff. So Notre Dame's going to show up and we'll see what they've got as a 20-point underdog against Alabama. Is there anything else we haven't hit on that you think's important or interesting?
No, I mean, not really. Like, I think we talked off air a little bit. I mean, to a certain extent, I think Notre Dame fans just want to keep this close from just kind of a respect perspective. I mean, if they can get in a shootout with Alabama for whatever reason, or keep Alabama's offense off the field and make it a 30 to 20 game or something like that, I think that will go a long way for Notre Dame gaining a little bit of national respect, at least on the for the college football playoff. I mean, I know me and you have talked about this several times in the past. I mean, I think Notre Dame's right in there in that top 10 and probably closer to top 5 than they are top 10. But the parity difference is real, at least in my opinion, and not really an excuse. I just think it's a fact. And, if part of that might be coaching to an extent as well. I mean, I think that there are arguments to be made that this isn't Notre Dame's most talented team over the last 8 years, but maybe coaching held them back in previous times. So they got to find this happy balance of coaching and talent when it all comes together. So no, I mean, I'm going in with I'm trying to go in with no expectations. I don't want to hope for the best or hope for the worst. And we'll go from there, I guess.
There you go. Well, for some reason, Alabama, and I understand the respect factor that they've earned through the years, but when Florida challenges them to a 52-46 game in which they made colossal defensive issues, mistakes in the first half that had nothing to do with talent or ability, it just was, committing non-action penalties in the first half that converted third downs into first downs for Alabama, or turned 3rd and 10s into 3rd and 5s for Alabama, and they mismanaged the clock at the end of the first half. I think it's got to give Notre Dame fans a little bit of hope, because while everybody swings the narrative to, well, if Florida played Alabama that close, then kudos to Florida, they must be better than we thought. It never gets to seem to be a narrative of, oh, is there something wrong with Alabama? Do they have some weaknesses there that can be exploited? And we will see here in just a few hours. So, Nathan, we appreciate you stopping by every time. Enjoy the game if that's possible, and we will see you soon.
Thanks for having me, Mark.